When life crashes in on you with the unexpected, when the phone rings with bad news, when your plans fall apart, when confusion or pain or fear knocks at the door, what is the first thing you do? For most of us, our first instinct is to reach for something human. We grab the phone and call a friend. We open our laptops and start researching. We lean into our own understanding. We look for a solution we can control, something we can fix, maneuver, or manipulate. But in doing that, we often bypass the very thing that could move the hand of heaven into our earthly situations. Prayer is not a last resort. It is not a fallback when all else fails. It is meant to be the first response. Prayer is not a last resort. It is a divine strategy that must be your first response in every situation. Too often, people treat prayer like a fire extinguisher behind glass. Break only in case of emergency. It becomes a backup option, a reaction instead of an initiation. But that was never God's design. Prayer was given as the believer's first weapon, first communication line, first expression of dependence, and first connection to heaven's power. When life hits hard, when pressure mounts, when confusion clouds the mind, prayer isn't just something to do. It's the thing to do first. The reason many people fail to experience divine breakthroughs is not because they don't pray at all, but because they wait too long to pray. They try to handle things in their own strength, reason through problems in their own understanding, and exhaust human resources before they even think to call on God. That delay communicates a misplaced trust. It says to God, "I'll handle this unless I can't," rather than "God, lead me before I even move." In the Bible, prayer is shown not as an afterthought, but as a starting point. Before Jesus began his public ministry, he spent 40 days in prayer and fasting. Before he chose his disciples, he spent the night in prayer. Before he faced the cross, he was in the Garden of Gethsemane on his knees, pouring his heart out to the Father. He didn't pray because he lacked power. He prayed because it was the divine order of priority. He showed us that no matter how anointed or strong or wise you are, prayer must always come first. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a declaration of authority. It says, "I don't move unless I hear from God. I don't act unless he leads. I don't fight unless he equips." When you treat prayer as your first response, you're declaring that your confidence is in God, not in yourself. You're recognizing that your wisdom is limited, but his is infinite. You're confessing that your strength has a ceiling, but his has no limit. And more than anything, you're honoring God's position as the sovereign one who rules over all things. The first step of faith is not action, it's communication. Before Moses stretched out his staff, he talked to God. Before Joshua marched around Jericho, he received divine instruction. Before Esther approached the king, she fasted and prayed. They didn't wait until things got out of hand. They sought God first, and he moved accordingly. The problem with many modern believers is not a lack of belief in God's power, but a failure to prioritize his voice. We have become so accustomed to instant answers, rapid solutions, and quick fixes that prayer seems too slow, too uncertain, too intangible. But prayer is not about performance, it's about positioning. It places you under God's covering, tunes your spirit to his frequency, and prepares your heart to walk in alignment with his will. And when you pray first, you invite God to go before you, to speak into your situation before your emotions do, to calm your heart before anxiety takes over, to shine light before you take another. Step in darkness. Prayer as a first response sets a tone of humility. It says, "God, I don't know what to do unless you show me." It keeps you from making hasty decisions based on feelings, assumptions, or external pressure. It guards your soul from unnecessary detours and consequences. and it invites God's supernatural perspective into your natural dilemma. When prayer is your first move, you're not reacting. You're responding from a place of spiritual strength. You're not driven by chaos. You're anchored in clarity. You're not trying to catch up to a crisis. You're walking ahead with the one who already saw it coming. This mindset also transforms how you handle success. Because if you pray first in crisis, you'll also pray first in opportunity. You won't just turn to God when things are falling apart. You'll seek Him when doors open, when favor finds you, when decisions need to be made about growth, promotion, or transition. Prayer won't just be a lifeboat. It'll be your navigation system. It won't just be something you use to survive. It'll be how you thrive. You'll become a person whose instincts are trained to look up before looking around. And in a world that pushes for action, speed, and control, that posture of prayer first will set you apart with wisdom, peace, and divine timing. The spiritual realm governs the physical, and prayer accesses God's authority to shift earthly realities. Most people live only by what they see, hear, and feel in the physical world, never realizing that what manifests in the visible often originates in the invisible. The Bible makes it abundantly clear that there is a spiritual dimension that impacts every area of life: relationships, health, finances, emotions, even national affairs. This unseen realm is not fictional or abstract. It's more real than what your natural senses can detect. Angels and demons are active. Battles are waged. God's will is being revealed and resisted. And unless a person learns to engage spiritually through prayer, they will remain vulnerable to attacks they cannot diagnose and battles they cannot win. Prayer is not a casual conversation. It is a legal transaction in the courts of heaven. When you pray, you are stepping into the presence of the Judge of all the earth. You are petitioning the King. You are inviting His authority to rule over a situation where disorder, confusion, or demonic influence might be trying to operate. And when that kind of authority is invoked, the natural begins to respond. Closed doors begin to open. Sickness begins to shift. Hardened hearts begin to soften. And strongholds begin to crumble. Not because of positive thinking or emotional intensity, but because heaven's decree overrides what was once thought immovable on earth. The enemy works tirelessly to keep believers unaware of this connection. If he can keep you bound to only the natural, you'll be reactive instead of proactive. You'll treat symptoms instead of addressing root causes. You'll live frustrated, trying to solve spiritual problems with carnal methods. That's why Ephesians 6 reminds us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. That means the real fight isn't with people, policies, or personalities. The real battle is happening in the unseen, and prayer is how you take your place in that battle. It's how you bind what needs to be bound and loose what needs to be loosed. It's how you speak God's word into a realm that responds not to human logic, but to divine authority. When you pray with understanding, you're not begging God to do something random. You're coming into agreement with what He already wants to do. Prayer doesn't twist God's arm. It releases His will, and that will carries weight in both dimensions. What God has already declared in heaven needs a vessel on earth to release it. That's why Jesus taught His disciples to pray, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." That statement is a revelation of how the two realms work together. Heaven has the blueprint, but earth needs the activation. And prayer is the bridge that connects what God has spoken in the Spirit to what needs to happen in the natural. This is why persistent prayer matters. Not because God is reluctant to answer, but because consistency in prayer establishes spiritual dominance. It builds spiritual momentum. It keeps your focus vertical when circumstances try to pull you horizontally. And in many cases, answers are delayed not because of God's denial, but because of spiritual resistance. Daniel prayed and had to wait 21 days for the answer, not because God was silent, but because warfare was happening in the unseen. That revelation alone should shift how prayer is viewed. It's not a weak discipline, it's warfare. It's not a soft response, it's the front line. And when believers understand the governing role of the spiritual realm, prayer no longer becomes a religious routine. It becomes a declaration of war against anything that contradicts the will of God. It becomes an act of rebellion against the enemy's plans. It becomes a weapon that uproots lies, establishes truth, and releases peace into chaos. You don't need to see everything change immediately to know something is shifting. You just need to stay in position, because once heaven moves, earth has no choice but to respond. Mountains move. Walls fall, waters part, because authority flows from the top down, from the throne of God into the heart of a praying believer, and from that believer into the world around them. So when the spiritual governs the physical, and prayer becomes the vehicle, it is not a question of if change will come. It's a matter of when it will manifest. The timing may vary. The method may surprise you. But the outcome is already settled in the place where God has the final word. And when His word is spoken through your mouth, rooted in prayer and fueled by faith, no earthly circumstance can remain the same under the weight of that authority. Delayed answers are not denied answers. Prayer aligns you with God's perfect timing and will. One of the greatest frustrations in the believer's walk is praying with faith and not seeing immediate results. It's tempting to assume that silence from God means rejection, that the absence of visible change means the prayer wasn't heard, that delay equals denial. But nothing could be further from the truth. God's delays are purposeful. They are not about ignoring you. They are about preparing you, shaping the circumstances, and aligning everything with a divine orchestration that goes far beyond what human perception can grasp. Prayer is not just about getting what you want. It's about becoming who God is forming you to be as He brings about what He has planned for you in His timing. God operates outside of time, yet He works within time for our benefit. He is the master of seasons, the author of process, and the keeper of divine schedules. While we live bound to clocks and calendars, God sees the beginning from the end and every moment in between. What may feel like a delay to you is actually precision to Him. Sometimes what you're asking for is not ready. Sometimes you're not ready. Sometimes both are true. And so, in His love and wisdom, God waits not to frustrate you, but to fulfill His purpose in the best way, at the best time, for the greatest impact. If He answered every prayer immediately, we would be tempted to trust in formulas rather than His heart prayer, when seen rightly, is not only a request, it's a relationship. It's not a vending machine where you input faith and expect instant results. It's a communion with the Father, a walking dialogue, a place where trust is built and faith is refined. In the waiting, God is not absent. He is present even if He is quiet. He is watching over His word to perform it. He is setting things in motion behind the scenes. He is developing character, deepening dependence, and detaching you from outcomes so your heart stays anchored in Him, not just in what He gives. When you pray and there is a delay, don't see it as wasted time. See it as divine development. God is not only preparing the blessing for you, He's preparing you for the blessing. Some answers are delayed because there is spiritual warfare in motion. In the book of Daniel, the prophet fasted and prayed for 3 weeks before the angel arrived with the answer. The delay wasn't due to God's unwillingness to respond, but because there was resistance in the spiritual realm. The enemy knows that a breakthrough in prayer means defeat for him, so he will try to interfere, distract, and discourage. But when you persist, when you keep praying even when nothing is changing, you are participating in a battle that your natural eyes cannot see, but your faith can sustain. Delay requires endurance, and endurance produces spiritual maturity that can carry the weight of answered prayer without crumbling under the pressure of it. Waiting on God in prayer does something powerful to your inner life. It purifies motives, clarifies desires, and removes idols. You begin to realize that what you thought you needed most may not be what you truly need. Sometimes the delay reveals that your heart was chasing something more than it was chasing God. In the process of waiting, God shifts your focus from the blessing to the blesser. You begin to trust that whatever He gives, however He gives it, and whenever He gives it, it will be good because He is good. The delay, then, becomes a training ground for deeper faith, greater wisdom, and stronger intimacy. Not every delay is due to your shortcomings either. Sometimes God withholds answers because He is working on other people connected to your prayer. The job you're praying for might involve someone else's heart change. The relationship you're waiting on might require healing in another person's life. The provision you're seeking may be tied to a chain of events that must fall into place. You are not the only one in the story, and God is working all things together, which includes other hearts, minds, and situations that must be brought into alignment with His will. So He waits, not in neglect, but in sovereign wisdom. Even when the answer seems far away, the presence of God is near. Even when the result is pending, the purpose is active. And even when the outcome hasn't changed, your heart is being changed. That is the power of delayed answers. They refine the vessel as much as they prepare the way. In the silence, He speaks to your soul. In the stillness, He strengthens your spirit. And in the unseen, He is working with more precision than you could ever calculate. Prayer, then, is not about managing results. It's about surrendering to timing. And in that surrender, you discover that the wait was not a waste. The silence was not empty, and the answer was never really denied. It was simply being timed by the one who makes everything beautiful in its time. Making prayer your first move invites supernatural power, peace, and clarity into your decisions and battles. Most people begin by reacting to life with instinct, emotion, or logic. They analyze the problem, weigh their options, talk to people, make a plan, and move forward hoping things work out. And while there's nothing wrong with using wisdom, strategy, or counsel, the problem comes when those things replace instead of follow prayer. Human insight is limited. Emotions are unstable. Advice can be flawed. But when prayer comes first, it creates space for the Holy Spirit to speak, guide, correct, and reveal what natural vision cannot detect. You may think you know the situation, but only God sees the whole picture. Only He knows the motives of others, the timing of events, the traps of the enemy, and the opportunities waiting just beyond your line of sight. Prayer positions you to receive divine downloads before you make earthly decisions. When you start with prayer, you're not just asking for a solution. You're inviting the presence of God into the entire process. His presence brings more than answers. It brings stability. In the middle of chaos, prayer becomes your anchor. While everything is swirling around you, you have access to a peace that doesn't make sense in the natural. That peace doesn't come from knowing how it will all turn out. It comes from knowing who is in control. And when your soul is anchored in Him, you can make decisions without being driven by fear. You can walk through storms without being overtaken by anxiety. You can respond with patience instead of panic, Because prayer has quieted your soul and reminded you of where your help comes from. Prayer is also where clarity is born. Many times people are overwhelmed not because their situation is too big, but because their vision is too clouded. The noise of stress, the opinions of others, and the confusion of too many options can make it almost impossible to know what to do next. But when you go into prayer, when you shut out the noise and get alone with God, things begin to clear up. You start to see what really matters. You begin to separate the urgent from the important. You receive discernment to know what's of God and what's a distraction. That clarity is priceless, especially in seasons of transition, conflict, or opportunity. Without prayer, you might choose the wrong door simply because it looked open. But with prayer, you can sense whether God is the one who opened it, or if it's a setup from the enemy battles are a part of life. Some are external, financial, relational, or situational. Others are internal, emotional, mental, or spiritual. Regardless of the type, every battle is impacted by how you choose to engage it. When prayer is your first move, you're not entering the fight alone. You're not relying solely on your intellect, your strength, or your experience. You're walking in covered, reinforced, and guided by the hand of God. And when God fights for you, the odds no longer matter. The size of the problem no longer dictates your confidence. The behavior of others no longer determines your peace. Because when God is involved, the battle shifts. What was heavy becomes light. What seemed impossible becomes manageable. What looked like defeat starts to look like setup for victory when you pray first. It also keeps your heart aligned. You don't just start doing what's right, you start wanting what's right. You begin to desire God's will more than your own. That heart alignment prevents pride from leading your decisions and bitterness from tainting your motives. It keeps you sensitive to the voice of the Holy Spirit, even when your emotions are pulling you in another direction. It's easy to justify wrong decisions when you feel wronged or desperate. But prayer calms the flesh so the Spirit can lead. It reminds you who you are and whose you are, and it recalibrates your posture so you operate from a place of love, truth, and strength. There's also something powerful that happens when you model a prayer first lifestyle. Others begin to notice that your reactions are different. They see peace when they expect panic. They hear wisdom when they expect confusion. They observe faith when fear would be understandable. And in doing so, your life becomes a testimony. People may not understand your theology, but they'll be drawn to your consistency, your calm, and your courage. All of that stems from a habit of prayer that doesn't just respond to problems but precedes them. It sets the tone for your day, the direction of your decisions, and the condition of your heart. It keeps heaven involved in your earth and ensures that you're not walking through life guessing, but being guided by the one who knows the end from the beginning. When prayer is your starting point, power follows your footsteps, peace guards your heart, and clarity lights your path. Prayer aligns your heart with the King. It reminds your soul who is in charge. It shifts the burden from your shoulders to his, and it invites divine interruption into your natural situation. You don't have to know everything, fix everything, or carry everything. You just need to know where to go first. And when you make prayer your first response, not your last resort, you step into a realm where the impossible becomes possible, not because of who you are, but because of who he is. So before the fear sets in, before the tears fall, before you lean into worry, before you launch your plan B, before you look for another person to help you, drop to your knees, open your mouth, and call on the name that's above every name, because that's not just a spiritual moment. That's how you bring heaven into history. That's how you let the supernatural touch the natural. That's how you declare to every enemy, every fear, every problem, and every doubt that God goes first, always.